So, I want to start today with a bad joke I came up with a couple weeks ago. A friend of mine got his STD results in the mail, but he was too scared to open the letter. So, he asked me to read it, probably one of the worst ideas he's ever had. So I open it, I read it, I act confused. I say, "I don't know why you're worried. Everything came back positive." What this joke reveals, 3 things. 1, HIV diagnosis is damn terrifying. 2, HIV is often a joking matter, especially for people not living with HIV. And 3, I myself have a terrible sense of humor. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. In 2014, I fell in love with a man, my second partner ever. We dated for about a year, and I thought we were just made for each other. But that December, I learned he'd been lying about a few things, including his HIV status. On January 7th, 2015, I was diagnosed HIV positive. This is my actual lab record. I still have it. You can see it right there. Johnathan Thurston, HIV, reactive. Now, back in the early 80s, they didn't have a name for this disease. It was called GRID to begin with, the gay-related immunodeficiency disease. For some people, it was called the 4H disease because, well, 4 of the major identified risk groups were Haitians, heroin addicts, hemophiliacs, and of course, homosexuals. They came up with the term AIDS fairly early, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. And this isn't the name of the disease itself. It strictly refers to the last stages of the virus. See, the average person has, let's say, between 600 and 1,000 CD4 cells bolstering their immune system at any given time. When I was diagnosed, I had 350. When you have 100 or less, that's called AIDS. But now we actually have a name for the virus. It's called HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus. There are about 2 million people living with HIV in America today. And you know what's crazy? People don't know what HIV looks like. Look at me. If you were to give me one of those rapid tests from Walmart right now, it would actually say I'm negative. It's called being undetectable. It means you cannot detect the virus in my blood. It means, according to the Center for Disease Control, that I cannot spread my HIV. One doctor told me that any one of you could cut me open and drink my blood like a vampire straight out of Transylvania, and you still wouldn't get HIV from me. I can't spread it, not through spit, not through sex. Now, as far along as meds have come the past few years, what sucks the most about HIV isn't really the death rate, not for me and others like me. It's the stigma. It's this cultural scapegoating of this disease as if it's the worst thing a person could possibly get. And that's part of the story I want to share with you tonight. It's a story I'm currently writing about in a book on HIV in 21st century America. And I encourage you to shoot me an email if you yourself have stories you'd like to share. But in thinking about stigma, one of the major cases of stigma is stigma by law, what's called criminalization. Criminalization here means the process by which people in power, politicians, law enforcement officers, lawyers, the media, treat people living with HIV as an active threat to human society. You see, right now, the current laws for disclosure focus in on this fact that if you were going to have any kind of sexual contact with someone, be it kissing, groping, whatever, you have to disclose your status to that person. On one hand, this makes sense, right? It's how we could stop HIV from ever spreading, right? Well, it's a bit more complex than that. For starters, it's the strictness of these laws that makes it so that many people refuse to ever get tested. One study showed that 15.6% of people who engage in risk activities and refuse to get tested know that they should be tested. But it's only illegal if you know you have it. You can't be committing a crime if you haven't been diagnosed yet. Furthermore, these laws ignore that undetectable even exists. Statistically, as numerous doctors have stated, you have a greater chance of contracting HIV from someone who says and believes they're negative than from someone who is HIV positive undetectable. This means that the current laws punish people who are healthy and taking their meds over people who refuse to get tested. That means I am considered a person who poses a health risk to all of you. You might think I'm exaggerating, but it couldn't be further from the truth. There have been cases of people sentenced to over 30 years in prison for spitting on someone while HIV positive, what the judge and jury have called attempted murder with a bioweapon, even though spit can't transmit HIV whether you're undetectable or not. One HIV positive undetectable man a few years ago here in Michigan was transferred from a minimum security prison to a maximum security prison for having oral genital sex with an inmate. He was moved to solitary confinement 23 hours a day, 7 days a week. He can only shower 3 times a week, but for no more than 5 minutes at a time. They took away his recreation and even the counseling that was part of his parole. He was there for 28 months without being told when he would be able to get out. 28 months. Now, another part of stigma comes from the general population, not just people in power. Where I get it the most is on dating apps. You know, apps like Tinder, Grindr, Scruff, OkCupid even. And I get messages like these. Sorry, not into disease. Why are you on here? You're just going to infect everyone. Not into filthy sluts. And I wish people like you would just go kill yourselves. Now this first guy, he is using a rhetoric of responsibility. He's saying that any person with any kind of STI should just never have intimacy again. And he's not alone in that. I once had a roommate a few years ago who said to me, well, if I were you, I just wouldn't have sex anymore. Just saying. As a result, I now hate the phrase, just saying. This next guy, he is calling me a slut. It's a common misconception that you have to be sexually promiscuous to contract HIV. A relative told me I should have kept my legs closed. A coworker told me it's what I got for being gay. And yet I contracted HIV from a closed, monogamous, romantic relationship, not a hookup. And finally, this guy, he takes the cake. He's telling me I should kill myself because I have HIV. I can hear what you're thinking. This is terrible. This guy's an asshole. Well, here's some news for you. As I said, I was diagnosed January 7th, 2015. That's 4 years now. Since that time, I've received 400 messages just like this one. From different people, different apps, different cities, different states. I've gotten it from people in their 20s, people in their 60s. And you better believe it's been tough. But I'm just one person. There are 2 million people living with HIV in America today. Mathematically, that'd be around 200 million messages a year in America with the core threat of kill yourself because you have HIV. Right now, suicide is one of the leading causes of death for people living with HIV. It's twice as high as people without HIV, especially within the first year of diagnosis. And now, I'm sure you can see why. Now, I tell you all this because it's the general public that needs to hear these things, to hear that people living with HIV are doing just that. We are living. Having sex with us is some of the safest sex you'll ever have. Knowing us, you will know some of the most compassionate and aware people ever. I say aware because we are aware of our own history. We are aware of the distinction between life and death and how thin that line is and how great it feels to have one pill we take once a day to keep that line in place. If you, someone without HIV, can learn that saying things like full-blown AIDS, are you clean, and drug or disease-free are harmful and offensive, we can start to fight stigma. If you know someone living with HIV or someone who's just been recently diagnosed with HIV, let them know that they are worthy of life, that they matter, that their existence matters. Let them know they are worthy of liberty, that they're not criminals or biohazards. And let them know that they are worthy of love. They deserve friends, family, relationships, romance, intimacy, passion, sex, whatever. They deserve love. Just saying. Now, I do want to end this on a hopeful note. Despite all the stigma right now, despite the criminalization, the high suicide rate, despite all of that, I have the highest hopes that we can push things in the right direction. We can create a world that is free of stigma, a place where people living with HIV can live their lives as fully and as full of love as possible. I know we can get there. I'm positive. Thank you.